Good morning, Salone B here, and let's talk about the spike in suicide rates in the U.S. Why are suicide rates rising? The recent death of Anthony Bourdain and Kate Spade have raised the question why suicide is becoming more common and what can be done to reverse the trends. The recent death of Anthony Bourdain and Kate Spade have raised the question, why is suicide becoming more common and what can be done to reverse the trends? While researchers have proposed everything from social isolation to bullying as a reason, it's still a mystery why rates are rising. Experts do have ever recommend approaches that could help reduce the rates. What's behind the rise? A report released by the Centers of CDC Control and Prevention CDC on Thursday, June 7th, showed the rates of death by suicide in the United States have risen by roughly 25% in the last couple decades. Though the reasons for that increase are not completely clear, in past research, experts have pointed to an increased sense of isolation among Americans, as well economic factors and a rise in mental illness. Other pointed to the rise of technology, which has replaced important face-to-face interactions. Though some argue technology actually decreases loneliness. But in the end, all these explanations are speculative. It's very hard to make a broad statement about suicide, said Dr. Caitlin Sazato, a professor of psychiatry in the University of Pittsburgh who has published widely on suicide prevention. For instance, it is now the second leading cause of death for people aged 15 to 24 in the U.S. And yet, many researchers think aging baby boomers will be especially vulnerable to suicide in the coming years, Sazato said. And previous CDC reports indicate that suicide in the U.S. is often connected to other forms of violence, such as bullying, sexual violence, or child abuse, according to the most recent study. Yet rates of those forms of violence have not increased and possibly dropped in the past 2 decades. Likewise, it is clear that if people can find help the first time that they consider suicide, they are more likely to recover and never make another attempt. And yet, people who have made an attempt once are much more likely to try again, Sazato said. Stopping suicide. Stopping individual suicide is possible. For instance, in a 10-year study at the Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit, doctors and therapists employed several interventions that led to an 80% drop in the suicide rate. Live Science previously reported one such method involved asking depressed patients how they envision dying. Doctors then created systematic roadblocks to enhancing the vision by, for instance, asking patients to remove firearms from their houses and then follow up to see if they actually did so. However, knowing that what drives suicide and having improved treatment options won't help if people don't reach out for help when they are at their most hopeless. And Susan Liendo, a practicing therapist and adjunct professor at the University of Southern California who specializes in suicide. Okay, this is a very long article, so I'm going to stop right there. I'm going to post the article in the link. So suicide is the leading cause of Americans' deaths since 2016. Over 45,000 people have committed suicide. And that is evidence that we have a mental illness problem. So let's keep talking about this. Like, share, subscribe. Salome B. Have a great evening.